Yes, we are live now. Jyoti Prakash, you may continue with the initial formalities of the session.
Yes. Thank you, Devasis. Good evening, everyone. This is 𝒂𝒏𝒅𝒆𝒑, co-founder Team Lex Cognoscenti. I welcome you all on behalf of my team to this edition of Lex Cognoscenti's Rendezvous series. So before I introduce the eminent guest of this evening, I must tell you the purpose behind organizing this series. So the basic purpose behind organizing this interview series is to facilitate and provide the legal fraternity with some invaluable anecdotes and escapades of several legal luminaries and doyens. So we truly believe that stories of struggles, legal adventures, and non-parallel display of skills of advocacy must be conveyed to all in the legal fraternity. And it is more specifically intended towards the budding ones. Above all, our endeavor is to create some positivity and motivation in these toxic circumstances that are prevailing nowadays. So today we are fortunately joined by Mr. Mandeep Singh Vinaik, Advocate, Delhi High Court. Sir is a passionate litigator and had enrolled in the bar in the year 1986. Since then, he has been regularly appearing before several judicial and quasi-judicial forums, including the Supreme Court of India, High Court of Delhi, and High Court of Himachal Pradesh, High Court of Uttarakhand, High Court of Punjab and Haryana, and several other judicial and non-judicial, quasi-judicial forums. So, Sir has represented many clients and has a very huge and rich history of litigating in several courts. So we are fortunately joined by Sir, and I welcome you, Sir, on board for this interview. Without losing any more time, and with your kind permission, I would request Devasis to take over this session and to start the first phase of interview questions.
My pleasure. My pleasure to be here with bright young people like you.
Please, Devasis.
Yes. Welcome you, sir, on board with us. And thank you, Jyoti Prakash, for succinctly introducing our organization and to the honorable guest of today's evening's interview session. So proceeding with the initial phase of questions that I have, sir, we would like to know from you that how was your childhood and your upbringing and your family background, and if you can tell our viewers something on that line.
Okay, see, obviously everyone is shaped by their experiences of childhood. And to put it in context, I come from families which are migrants from what is now Pakistan, people who migrated in 1947, who came to make a new home in this new place called New Delhi and started their lives again after being uprooted. So obviously, a child like me grew up with a lot of history, lot of personal history, lot of memories of my previous generations, some good, some very bad, and therefore that kind of there are many like me all over North India, at least I can say, who grew up in those turbulent times in a new republic which was finding its own feet, a constitution which was unprecedented and something which came up in this area for the first time. Something wonderful had been created not too long ago in 1950. So all of us grew up in that environment, in that atmosphere, in the heart of New Delhi, looking at all that was happening around us. So if you ask about my childhood, it was frightfully interesting. I must say that. A great childhood.
That's quite interesting to know from you about your childhood. Now, this brings me to ask you another question: that how you came to take up law as career, and whether there was anyone in your family, or is in there anyone in your family who is in legal profession.
See, about age, I can tell you my wife is a lawyer, my daughter is a lawyer, my brother-in-law is a lawyer, lots of them now. But let me tell you, till I joined LL.B, I did not want to become a lawyer. Actually, if you permit me, I can share some old stories with you. What really happened? because my father was a lawyer. My father practiced in Delhi High Court for 62 years. And till his last day, he was working. Right? At age 88, he was still working. Now, he wanted me to join law, and I was very much into science. So I did my graduation from Delhi University in plant sciences, and then I took admission in master's course in M.Sc in Delhi University also. And I said, look, law is not my subject. Sorry, I'm not interested. And my father had a deal with me. He said, look, for 15 days, I pay the fee. You don't even have to spend anything. You join LL.B in Delhi University. And if you leave after 15 days, no problem. You join your M.Sc course. Right? So I took admission in M.Sc and I took admission in LL.B. Now, on the second day of LL.B, something happened. If you permit, I want to share that part. That's what made me into a lawyer, really. See, there was something called the Students' Legal Services Clinic in Delhi University Campus Law Center, where we used to go for visits to some courts here and there just as an experience. Now, that was meant for second year and third year students, and I was a first day student. I had just joined on, it was my second day, and I hopped into that bus taking those students to these courts. And I happened to be wearing a white shirt, and I must have passed off as some kind of lawyer. And when I went there, this was the beggars court. Now, for my young friends, I just want to share something, that there was something called the Bombay Prevention of Begging Act, which was applicable to Delhi from 1960 onwards. Now, this act had a definition. One of the definitions was having a person having no visible means of subsistence and wandering about like a vagabond. So in front of me, busloads of beggars would be brought by the police, dragged by their collars, kicked around, and they would be sentenced to 1 year's imprisonment without a question, with not a single advocate to represent them. Now, there was one gentleman who was brought holding a bag of woodworking instruments in his hand. In Punjabi, we would call him a mistri, or someone who works with wood. Now, this man, I asked him, why have you been brought here? You seem to be a person employed. He says, look, I was resting in a park. I was tired after a day's work, and they asked me for money. And I could not pay the constable, and he's brought me, and I'll go for 1 year to beggar's prison, and my family will starve. So I went up to the magistrate, and I told the magistrate that he does not fit into the definition, because his ostensible source of income is in his own hand. The magistrate, who is now retired, he was a good man. He listened to me. He looked at the definition in the act, and he discharged him. Now, see, Debashish, just look. For a man who did not even want to be a lawyer, on the second day of LL.B, an incident like this happens where this man is touching my feet in gratitude. He said, I don't have any money. I said, I don't want your money. You just changed the course of my life. You made something possible for me which I had not thought. That today, because of one clever reading of one provision of law, I could alter the course of many lives. Not just this man was released and discharged from an offense, his whole family was saved in a way. That was, Debashish, a very, very gratifying event. Now, to someone, it may seem like a small thing. For me, as a young guy, it was a very significant event. I started thinking of law as a career. And I went home and told my father, I said, okay, now we are going to be lawyers. Now we are not going to go into science. You know, I have no regrets. I have that one incident was so enlightening, so revealing that, look, there's something to be done here. I hope that
Indeed, sir.
answers your question as to why I became a lawyer. Very
Indeed,
strange,
sir.
but that's how things are.
And even as you rightly said that some incidents put great impact on our life and even change the course of our day-to-day life and career as well. That was quite
Yes,
interesting to know
definitely.
from you.
Yeah.
Indeed, sir. So, sir, as you said that your father was also a lawyer, so I would like to know that whether anybody else was there who was your inspiration when you were studying law in Delhi University, apart from him.
See, my relationship with law as a child used to be that look, there is a father who goes in the morning and comes back at night, and he works very hard, and sometimes is very happy, sometimes he is not. So, honestly, at that as a child, I it was just another thing. Okay, my father is a lawyer. His friends, I used to meet a lot of his friends on social occasions, but that was it. My reality of law, I mean, law as a reality came alive only after I got into LLB and I started reading something. I started looking at the law and and then it became real. And then I started visiting the Supreme Court and Delhi High Court because I was fortunate to have access to both these courts. And those days there were no passes, anyone could walk in. So many of these important cases I heard being argued. And I used to be the curious young man who was always poking his nose into the courtroom, even when nobody invited him. I was always sitting here and there, listening to things. So that's when it became real. You see what I mean?
Indeed, sir. Now, this brings me to ask you another question. That how was your initial days at your alma mater, and what all subjects fascinated you as a law student?
Okay, let me be honest and candid with you. My 3 years of LLB, I seriously enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, but not just for the subjects that were taught, but because of the interaction with some wonderful people. People like me, people older also. I had a very, very rich time, if I can say that. I had great friends whom I'm all in touch with even today. A large number of them are practicing lawyers. There were people older than me. There were civil services officers who had taken time off to do LLB. There were all kinds of people. And Delhi University, I can't say about today. I really don't know. But Delhi University was a wonderful place. You could be there in the best company, the most intellectual company, and it was a great institution. At the Campus Law Center, which I'm talking about, we had some of the finest teachers of law. When I look back, I realize that I did not value it so much at that time. But when I look back as to how my teachers taught me, it was fascinating as a subject itself. But you asked me a specific subject. So my specific subject would be I used to love reading the history of law. There was a subject, but legal history. I don't know, must be still having it. But I mean, that's the only subject which ostensibly one would not even use in your practice. But that was my subject which fascinated me. I would just read one chapter and then go and research it all over the place. And don't forget, we didn't have access to internet those days. Things were very different. I mean, at least I didn't have access. There was an internet. I wasn't even aware of it at that time. And for me, then research meant sitting in libraries, sitting over encyclopedia. I would go fascinated. I sometimes wish I had studied actual law a little more. But anyway, that was a good time.
Indeed, sir. That was a great answer to hear from you. Uh, Now, we would like to know from you that how was your initial days at the bar? As Jyoti Prakash introduced that you joined in 1984. So, how was your initial days there?
See, my initial days came as a very big shock and a wake up call, if I may say so. Now, why do I say that? See, when I was in college as a science student, I was considered a very bright guy and I had very good marks, top of my college, everything. Then in LL.B also I had pretty decent scores, despite all the time wastage and all the fun that I had, but I still had pretty decent scores. And coming to a place like Delhi High Court, all with its original side and the writ jurisdiction, you get a shock. You get a shock. Let me say something about Delhi High Court. Delhi High Court is a top-heavy institution. It's a reverse pyramid. The best minds, the best intellectual judicial minds are concentrated in one place. There can be no bullshit over there. Now, someone with an attitude and some young guy who thinks he knows a little bit about the law comes to a place like Delhi High Court, and he's dressed down in the first few days, all his attitude is washed out. I'm saying something positive. Please don't get me wrong. What I mean is, I suddenly realized that I knew nothing. And that's been an enduring long lesson that every day I have to remind myself how much more I need to know, how much I need to be curious about. Now, Delhi High Court came as a very big shock to me. I used to go to court. I was fortunate I started work on my own initially in the first couple of years. And then I joined up with two very good friends of mine as a partner. But in the first couple of years, I did work on my own in the district courts and some work in Delhi High Court. And it was a very big surprise because, you see, you're no longer the blue-eyed buyer of anyone. You have to be prepared. You have to have a certain level and knowledge. And you can't really bluff your way through anything. So my first few appearances in the High Court, well, I must say, almost bordered on the traumatic. But I enjoyed it. When I look back, I wish that I'm so glad it happened like that.
Quite interesting to know your initial days and how you have dealt with the first case, and what were your memories with that. Now, I would like to ask something different from uh, this particular legal field. As we know that you were there in Delhi during the emergency period. So, how was the
Yes.
situation, law order situation basically at that time? And if you like to tell us something interesting about that phase.
Why not? Certainly. See, because my father was an active lawyer in Delhi High Court, and he belonged to a group of lawyers very close to each other who were deadly opposed to the emergency, who were vocal about it. Now, if you recall, I mean, you may not personally recall, but you're all students of history. There was something called the Maintenance of Internal Security Act, also known as MISA, those days. Now, what used to happen was that anyone who voiced an opinion of dissent against the then government was locked up under MISA. That a police officer, I mean, someone like a sub inspector had to say, I believe this man is likely to be a threat to internal security of this nation. And what did he do? He said the emergency was not justified. The emergency was wrong. Now, I, as a schoolboy, had the traumatic experience of seeing my father's friends being taken up into custody for a year at a time. And what did they do? They only, if today I do so much, I say so much, you may have read some of my writings on Facebook and other things. I would have been arrested for 100 years by now. I should have been finished off if those standards were to apply. So therefore, see, it's like this. Emergency was a very traumatic time for a lot of us. I remember the CID men, people in Delhi police dressed up as sadhus in saffron clothes, walking around outside lawyers' houses, checking out who are they meeting, what are they doing. That kind of police state we were suffering from. And I have no hesitation in saying that was one of the very bad times of this country. A very, very bad time. I'm surprised that you know about these experiences of emergency, but you may have read something I've written. But otherwise, it was a very rough time, and I can never forget that certain day in April 1977 when the election results were announced and the Janata Party won the election. And I woke up early morning, and the newspaper used to be delivered at 6 o'clock. And this Indian Express was dropped in at my balcony. And I read the headlines and I felt liberated. It was almost like, the fall of the Berlin Wall or something. I know, just understand what I'm saying. It was that kind of feeling, like something happened. I got liberated. It was that kind of experience. And for an impressionable young boy, it was even more so. Maybe had I been older, it wouldn't have been so bad. That's the times that was the sentiment of those times.
That's a fascinating story you said regarding the emergency period. That is quite true. And even when we read about emergency period and how everything was here and there, and rights, fundamental rights were shattered by the then government, we feel really bad at this point of time. Even they were controlling judiciary and other things also. So that's a dark period, I must say, for this country.
Yes, but then don't forget that ADM Jabalpur has been reversed, right? It's the same Supreme Court, same court number one. Things are brighter and things look up. It happens. These things come in waves in the history, in the life of a nation. It's a young nation still, and there's a lot to be proud about, and a lot to be optimistic about, if you may ask my view. I would say, on the whole, we are on the ascendant. Don't look at it in a micro view. Take a larger view, and we are on the ascendant. We are a good nation. We've sustained ourselves where others have floundered around us. We're an island of democracy.
Indeed, sir. We should always keep positivity in our life and look forward to what good things are happening all around. So that was absolutely uh, correctly portrayed, sir. Now, as we know that you visit a number of high courts for different types of matters. So I would like to know that if you can tell our viewers any history of any of the court buildings or any other historical legal monuments that you have visited during the course of your visits to these high courts.
Okay, can I be honest and candid with you and not say all the right things? Look, it's not just the high courts. I really revel in going to many high courts. I go to district courts in so many places. I do civil and criminal work both. Takes me to from judicial magistrates courts right up to the high court in so many states I've been going, and hopefully travel will open up and I'll resume my adventures and visits. But I tell you something, it requires a very overactive imagination to view things and buildings the way I do, and institutions for that matter. See, sometimes it's not even good to have an overactive imagination, but I seem to have been born with it. Now, to me, when I say I'm in the Bombay High Court building, or the Allahabad building, or Jaipur, the new one, or the new Lucknow building, you see what happens. Every door, every window, every stone, every pillar, every statue starts speaking a story. And I have to tone down my thought process. I have to say, no, don't get so involved in this painting or this statue of Babu Rajendra Prasad or this statue of some British barrister, because you've got some work to do. You've got a case to argue. Now, so therefore, I revel in these visits. And it's not just the court buildings, it's also wherever I go. I have this desire to walk around, to look at the stones on the ground. For example, Calcutta High Court is such a treasure. That building, if you have 3 hours to wait, you don't get bored. You walk around 2 floors of Calcutta High Court and you see so much. It's so fascinating that this entire era comes leaping at you. It's from every nook and cranny. In Bombay, of course, they've done a wonderful job of a museum. Even, by the way, even Allahabad High Court has a good museum. These are places worth visiting. So that's the icing on the cake. Of course, I go for my case. I get paid for it. That's wonderful. But one really enjoys these places. So many. The Nagpur High Court, for example, the High Court building at Nagpur, it's so brilliant. It's so cleanly kept, so understated, but it's like a Buddhist stupa. It's got its own architecture. Fascinating, really fascinating. So India has this, if somebody can appreciate it, it's such a wonderful place to work in, especially a litigation lawyer. I sometimes am so glad that I'm in litigation. It takes me all over the place, and that's why I enjoy every day of my life. It's so fascinating. I'm just waiting for this lockdown to get over and let's get on with life. Okay.
Indeed, sir. We all are stuck here in our home due to these trying times. And even I also like traveling and visiting various places and to know about the history of various high courts and other courts, whichever I visit during my competitions or any other work. So
Hmm.
we are also really waiting for this
Yeah.
lockdown and this COVID thing to over as soon as possible. Now, sir, I would like to ask you about the cases of which you are proud of, as you must have dealt with n number of cases during all these almost 4 decades. So, if you can tell us something about the cases of which you are proud of, or which were the best cases of yours till date.
See, I'll tell you something which you may not be expecting to hear. See, I have, like many of other people of my age, I've handled a lot of litigation, done a lot of cases on every subject. But the cases I'm most proud of, I'm seriously proud of today, are the ones in which I did not earn a penny. I did not earn anything in those cases. Those are the cases I did in subjects like women's rights, domestic violence, cases which I did pro bono, cases which I did for people who were suffering because of their peculiar condition in life, who were suffering abuse and violence, and where I could go up to a metropolitan magistrate and get justice done and get some impact on people's lives. If you ask me, those are the cases which never got reported. Those are the cases which nobody will ever read about in future. So but if you ask me, they are the ones closest to my heart. Maybe that's not the expected answer, but really, when somebody asks me like this, then I have to be honest and true to my heart. I am proud of all the work I've done, and there's some little bit of work I'm not proud of. That's all right. But the real, I've just told you what really closest to my heart, because that's where I had hands-on impact. See, you win a civil suit for a company, it adds a couple of crores to their balance. It's fine, it's great. And then you have a nice judgment which is reported and you show it around a little bit. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. It's great to do that work. But really, you know, that's what, when I look back after another 35 years, I plan to work for another 35 years, by the way. So when I look back, that is what I still suspect I will be the most proud of. That's the work I did. And that was, by the way, not in the High Court or Supreme Court. That was in the district courts.
Indeed, sir. There will be cases which will be closer to our heart, but then they won't be reported or publicized or come to news media. But Even then, self satisfaction is necessary, as you said, and I can see that you were quite self contented with the cases that you have dealt and is proud of. That was quite interesting to know from you. But now, I forgot to ask you something related to your law studies during your Delhi University. I would like to know that who were the professors at that time whom we should know and were quite eminent at the lectureship or teaching field of law.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I have very good memories of many of my teachers. See, there were good teachers and there were average teachers. And there's no point talking about the average teachers. But what is important is more than taking names, it is important to distinguish what makes that teacher so great. That's what is important to get. It's not about the names. Yeah, I remember all the names. I remember Mr. Bedi, Mr. Batra, so and so, so many professors, right? What, according to me, makes a teacher of law stand out and stand apart is the feeling which he brings to the subject. Does he or she feel that subject? See, I had a teacher of criminal law who used to teach criminal law in stories. Now, the first day I sat in that class, he came and said a few stories. And a few students around me said, "Arey, ye kya bol raha hai? What does it mean? ये तो कहानी सुनाता है." लॉ पढ़ाए ना, आईपीसी खोलो, उसका सेक्शन पढ़ो. But he would tell us stories. And then I realized that inherent in those stories is a great teaching. And then once he's told a few stories, and some of them were quite hilarious. So then he would say, "Okay, now, gentlemen, open 499 of the IPC and now read it with me." Now, then I saw, now it made sense to me. If somebody can easily say, "Arey, 302 ka farak bata do," tell me the difference. There are so many books which tell you, list out all those differences, right? Fine. But if a teacher can relate it with life and then tell you how, and then makes you read that provision, that's teaching. So somewhere I found that whoever I personally rated as great teachers were the ones who lived those ideas, who could lift stories from real life, who could relate it with it, because law has to be taught by example. Law can't be just taught out of a book. It's something which has to be breathed and lived moment to moment. So when I have students, sometimes I have invariably after every semester I have 3 or 4 or 5 interns from some law college, and you know what, I give them an exercise just to give you an idea. I tell them, "How will you go home from the high court?" They say, "Sir, I will go in the metro." So, or somebody says, "I will go in a taxi," or something. So I tell them, by tomorrow morning, tell me 3 contracts that you entered into by the time you reached home. People say, "Sir, I'm not entering into any contract." Right? No, I said, "No, you are. Read up the contract act before you leave my room. And before you reach home, I want to hear about 3 contracts. And if you don't, I'll punish you tomorrow morning." Okay. So this poor student, they're saying, "Sir, what kind of exercise is this?" But anyway, I said, "You have to do it. I don't care. It's non-negotiable." Right? So next morning, you see the face. Everyone's come back smiling and they say, "Hey, look, I offered to pay the fare to the metro and they said yes, and they gave their assent. They accepted the offer by giving me the token or the ticket. That's my first contract I entered into." You know what I mean. Law is something that is to be taught and linked to life. Law is not a dry subject, and we require special skills to make law into a dry or boring subject. You really have to make an effort to make this into boring. But I'm afraid it still happens. It still happens. I've known of teachers. I've seen younger students going into classes where somebody comes on a blackboard, drones out some definitions, and say, "Okay, now memorize this and come tomorrow." Right? That's not the way to teach law. So, if your question was, what are those? What is it that I remember about my professors? That's what I remember. That's what I remember and cherish. And of course, all lawyers are teachers also. We always have someone to teach and someone to learn from. And maybe, maybe today is not the right time, but I've learned so much from other lawyers. I still go fascinated to watch other people arguing their cases. How did they prepare? What they did? So I'm a student more than a teacher, I guess. I do teach whatever I can, but I really believe I'm a student still. Every day.
Indeed, sir. Lawyer's life is always uh, s- uh, is like always a student. We have to be a student throughout our legal career because we read about a lot of statutes. Whenever a new case comes, we read about that particular statute and anything that is related with that case. So we have to
Can
be
I
law
can I
student
share one
always.
incident with you, Debashish? One
Indeed, sir.
incident where, you see, after I enrolled as a lawyer, and I happened to be reading, someone mentioned in some hearing, it was not my case, it was someone else's case where they cited the Menaka Gandhi versus Union of India judgment, where it was held that the right to have travel documents and right to travel outside the country is an aspect of Article 21, an aspect of the fundamental right to life and liberty. Now, when I ran into the library and I searched for that judgment and I read the judgment and I was even more fascinated. Then I looked for the lawyers who had argued that case. And I saw the first name, one Mr. Madan Bhatia, who was a wonderful, wonderful lawyer. He's no more, he's passed away. But now I didn't know Mr. Bhatia personally. So I started asking questions for Mr. Madan Bhatia in the High Court. Now, everywhere I would go, I would ask, "Where is Mr. Bhatia? I want to listen to him argue." And then people told him that there is this young man who's stalking you, that he's chasing you all over the place. So every time I would go to some court where he had to appear, then he would kind of move on to another court or something. Finally, he called me and said, "Why are you asking so much about me? What's your interest?" I said, "Sir, I just want to hear you argue. I want to see how much you prepare. If you are the person who created that judgment in a way your inputs brought about that law, I want to watch you in action." So then he understood. He was very nice and very kind, but I think he was glad to get rid of me after some time. But similarly, it's something we have to be staying alive to our people around us. I'll tell you, I recently, not maybe a couple of years back, there was a judgment on triple talaq by the Supreme Court. It was a judgment called Shaira Bano, right? So I read that judgment, fascinated. I read that judgment and reread passages from it, and obviously learned from it. And then I looked up the advocates, and I found one very close friend of mine, Mr. Amit Chadda, had argued that case. So I was even more fascinated. I said, "Look, there is this man who I took so much for granted. He's done so much hard work that I have learned so much from his work that I sent a message to him. I said, I want to appreciate what you've done." So it's like we live in this living community. Every day is learning, especially in litigation. I would say every day you walk into a court like Delhi High Court or many other high courts, there's so much to be learned, so much to be done. There's no end to this. That's why maybe I sound a little more enthusiastic than I should, but that's how things are. That's how I perceive the world.
Indeed, sir. And the perception that you carry uh, as you portrayed now is really fascinating and will obviously make our viewers energetic and will fill them with inspiration and energy. I am sure about that. Now, as we know that you appear before Supreme Court and other high courts, I would like you to tell us some the very basic differences in the approach in professional practicing and the procedures before the Supreme Court, high courts, and even you have visited district courts. So, if you can tell very basic pointers and differences regarding all three forums.
See, I have some thoughts about what you just said. You know, Debashish, the Supreme Court, especially on admission days, is a different kind of practice. Do not forget that after going through 3 or 4 rounds, someone has reached the Supreme Court. Usually, I'm not talking of regular cases, that's different. I'm talking of admission matters on SLP days. Now, the attention span, and rightly so, I must repeat, rightly so, the attention span of a judge in the Supreme Court listening to an admission matter in a discretionary jurisdiction has to be short. So the advocate he has to learn. See, initially we all did the same mistake. We came with huge law points, huge research, judgments saying, I want to cite AIR 1959, so and so. It doesn't mean anything there. In that 20-second attention span, the lawyer has to be able to deliver the crux of that case, crystallize it in 3 sentences, and if you can catch the attention of the court, and if it's a point worth following up, you'll get your result. That's as far as 80% of the Supreme Court cases are concerned from a lawyer's perspective. And I entirely endorse that it should be that kind of time only given, because ultimately people have already been through the entire judicial system, and you can't demand as of right that every case I bring to the Supreme Court must be entertained. Fine. Now, when you come down to the High Court, well, in certain jurisdictions, it's much the same. You have to be able to cull out from your reading, from your knowledge, whatever you have, from the reading of the facts of the case, you have to bring it out in such a way that you catch the attention of the court. Yes, in civil suits, in criminal trials, it's totally different. There you do have the luxury of going into elaborate trials. You do have the luxury of going into elaborate cross-examinations. You lead evidence, you muster up evidence, you file your documents along with the plaintiff. That's a different game altogether. So it's difficult to compare. But I would say that one has to have the bandwidth and the adaptability to shift from this to that and back to this. Fortunately, of those of us who live in Delhi, it's half a kilometer away. So we finish a little bit of work in the High Court, run to the criminal courts, which is another half a kilometer away, then run to the Supreme Court, do something there, come back to the High Court. So that kind of facility we do have, right? So, but I have tried to bring out what is the essential from the practitioner's point of view. What is the difference between practicing in the Supreme Court? Of course, in regular cases, you better know your job. You better know what you are saying. You better know your facts, and you better know your law, and then be able to put this into expression. See, do not forget, there are judges, most judges will read. Most judges will have read your file, will have read your facts, but they cannot be expected to read everything. Don't forget, I have 2 matters to read for a day, 3 maybe, 4. But the gentlemen on the bench are reading 60 to 70 matters. There's a huge difference. It's unfair to expect, and I've heard people say this, अरे देखो वो ऊपर बैठा है उसने तो पढ़ा ही नहीं. For heaven's sake, तुम तो 5 पढ़ रहे हो, वो तो 100 पढ़ रहा है. So you got to be up with your facts, regardless of where you are. So this is one thing which is common to all kinds of practice. You've got to be ready with your facts. Those are the mistakes I made earlier, and hopefully I don't repeat them. Of course, once in a while you still make mistakes. It's all right. You're human. But yes, I would say that is one thing common to all kinds of practice. You've got to know your file, you've got to know your facts. I hope that answers your question.
Indeed, sir. You have very well pointed out the importance of reading the brief, taking out the crux of the case, and then the suitable and apt law and the decision that would be applicable. And that is what you, as you said, is common in every forum where you practice. That was quite great to know from you. Now, as we know that you have appeared and handled numerous cases in different forums, do you remember any such conversation or courtroom interaction which you consider was memorable or remarkable or humorous or witty? So the scope is quite big, but you can give us some anecdotes for our viewers.
Of course, there are so many events which happen, and I'd rather not take names, but I'll tell you there was one very good teacher of mine in LL.B. Now he taught me civil procedure code, right? And after some time, he became a judge of Delhi High Court. Of course, he retired eventually as a Supreme Court judge. Now he became a judge of Delhi High Court, and there is this provision of Order 37 for summary suits. Now, he taught me a certain view about summary suits in class in LL.B. And somewhere that lesson stuck in my head somewhere. I said, hey, okay, I got it. And after many years, I appeared in his court, and we were discussing something about leave to defend. And he said, look, I don't know where did you get this strange idea of leave to defend from. Mr. Vinaik, you need to read up a little more. Who gave you this idea? So I said, see, if your lordship permits me, your lordship gave me this very idea when your lordship was my teacher in law faculty. Now, hats off to that gentleman. His lordship had the sense of humor to get it and laugh about it and said, yeah, okay, we'll correct the impression today. You may have been taught something earlier. We are going to change it today. So see, these things keep happening in a living institution. You meet people outside, you meet people inside, you interact at personal levels, you interact in discharge of your duties. It's all wonderful, and by and large, we've been fortunate in having great company, great surroundings, and seen some of the best around us. I mean, one could go on
Indeed.
and on about it, but you know how things are. These are limited time programs. Maybe one day I should write about this.
Indeed, sir, and we will surely wait for your write up. Maybe on Facebook or LinkedIn. We are
Why
connected
not?
there, so
Why
we will
not?
surely wait for
Yeah.
that. Now, sir, another question that I would like to ask you is about the eminent members of the bar when you joined law, or you have like seen any of them during the course of your practice of these 4 decades. So you can tell us something interesting or any aspect about the doyens of the bar at that time.
See, again, as I've repeated, I was very fortunate in getting into this select club of Delhi High Court, where there were so many good people around, so many wonderful people. But I'll tell you of something which was an unpleasant incident, but which turned out to be fine later for me. Maybe I'm glad it happened. So this was one of my first few cases, and there was this designated senior advocate who was senior to my father by about 10 years. So you can have an idea how venerable, how respected, a very senior man, very highly respected man. Now, I was to do a cross examination of his witness. This was in my first year of law, and I got an independent matter to do a cross-examination because my client couldn't afford a more senior lawyer. So he used to pay me. Let me share with you. I used to get 100 rupees a hearing in that case. This was right in the beginning. And I believe me that 100 rupees made me very happy on every hearing. So you see, this man, he engaged me and I did a lot of work on that cross-examination. And this very venerable senior standing up opposite me, I asked my first question. He said, "What a fool." And it was a young judge. And the young, not in the high court, this was in the trial court. And the young judge was also a little overawed by the personality of this lawyer. And so I asked my second question. He said, "Did you even do your LL.B or you've just come from somewhere?" So I said, "I'm sorry, sir. Let me ask my question. You can't comment like this." So the third question, he said, "Another stupid question." So I started perspiring, I was like, I was really upset. I said, "What's going on? This man is humiliating me." And I looked to the judge and the judge was looking terrified. The young judge, he just got into judicial service and he was looking terrified. He didn't know where to go. He was hiding his face behind the file. And so 3 or 4 questions later, I told the judge, I don't think I can do this today. Can you please defer it to tomorrow? So there were 2 dates for trial. In those days, we used to sometimes fix 2 dates. So he said, "Come tomorrow." So I went home that evening and I told my father, I said, "I don't think I'm okay for this profession. I made a mistake because this friend of yours is humiliating me in court and grilling me and making all kinds of snide remarks." And my father said, "Fine. You leave, take up a job, right? And someone will humiliate you in their job, and then you'll run away from that job and take up another job. And then wherever you go, someone or the other will say something to you. And you keep running all your life." I said, "So what's the other option?" He says, "The other option is go give it back to him tomorrow." Give it back to him. I went back next day. So I asked my first question on the second day. And he said, "Again, this fool is back." So I told him, I won't tell you the name. I told him, "Please keep quiet. Any more such observations from you and I'll give it back to you." Now this man, he kept quiet for the rest of the cross-examination session. And after a day or two, he met me along with my father in the High Court lobby and he told him, "Your son is terribly behaved. He was so rude to me." And my father told me, "I'm so proud of you." So, well, as in other fields of life, you encounter these kind of things. They keep happening. I know there have been wonderful teachers, wonderful guides. I'll share something with you. There was a murder case of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister in those days. In 1984, her own security guards murdered her, and the trial happened in Tihar jail. So I could not attend the trial, but the appeal was heard. The appeal against conviction and sentence was heard in Delhi High Court. And I used to sit through that hearing. On most days, I would be, when everyone had walked off, I used to be the last row in that courtroom, sitting there, just listening. And I remember Mr. P.N. Lekhi, one of the defense counsel, arguing that appeal. And believe me, hats off to the memory of that man. He would not sometimes open his file for 2 hours. He would have all the facts, the minor facts, the nuances, the little detail of everything that he was arguing. He was mustering evidence, he was reading evidence, and he would do it extempore. That gave me an idea. That's the kind of intellectual giants, that's a kind of memory, that's a kind of commitment that a lawyer can have. There's so many people like that who inspired me, who moved me, and continue to do so. One goes every day and looks at some fascinating work being done by someone. They may be your contemporaries, they may be younger to you, And Debashish, these days I see people in their late 20s, 27, 28, coming and arguing like veterans, being so good that the standard has gone up tremendously. The standard of the bar is fascinatingly higher than what it used to be. So with the judges, according to me, the judges are better today than they used to be. The lawyers are better than they used to be. I really feel this profession is on the ascendant right now. This is the right time to come into it if any of your friends are thinking about it. So difficult to list out people, but so many people. And I'm also grateful to that old gentleman who tried to rag me also. It's okay. I learned something great from there also.
Indeed, sir. As we can infer from this particular answer that you have converted criticism into positive criticism and taken it in a positive way.
I have
And
no choice. I have
indeed.
no choice but to do that.
So we should learn that because criticism will come everywhere where you go, everywhere.
You
So
bet.
we have to
Yeah.
indeed, sir. By that, I would like to end the questions that I have. And now I would like to call upon Jyoti Prakash to ask the further questions that he has with him.
Now
So
you're
I would
scaring me.
request our
He's got that look on his face that this something very serious is about to happen. Okay, Jyoti Prakash, I'm here. Okay.
I would request,
Thanks,
yeah,
Devashish.
I would
Thanks a
request
lot,
our,
Devashish.
thank you, sir. I would request our viewers to stay tuned with this interview. It will be a great part of this interview to hear Jyoti Prakash and Mandeep sir conversing with each other. Thank you so much, sir, for answering so
Okay.
succinctly and
Okay.
in brief to our answers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Devasis. Thank you. Thank you, sir. I was listening to all these conversations, and those
Mm-hmm.
were very much interesting, especially the conversation relating to the emergency days and your
Uh-huh.
initial days at the bar. So, sir,
Mm-hmm.
as you now just mentioned that the legal profession and the quality of lawyers in the ascending stage, sorry, we can say in the descending stage. So, what is your view? What is the reason behind that? Why
No, no,
the legal profession?
I said something else. Jyoti, what I said was I seriously believe it's on the ascendant, not descending. It is on the ascendant. That's what my observation is. I mean, you can disagree, but really, let's look at it this way. When I joined LL.B, I walked in and paid the fee and took admission. Today, I see young people preparing and taking coaching classes for the entrance exams to LL.B. I couldn't even have imagined such a day would happen. In my time, invariably, someone told you, okay, that means you never got admission into anything else, therefore, you're doing law. That kind of observation would be common. So things are getting better. There are bright students, good students who want to come up and do this work, who want to be advocates. And therefore, I assume that means there's something good happening here, isn't it? What do you say?
Yes, sir. But as you mentioned about your anecdotes and the qualities of those legends, those are very rare these days. So we hardly ever find those qualities in our days lawyers and our judges. Those judges are excellent. There is no doubt. But still, in a comparison, they fall behind. So that is what I was observing.
Okay,
So,
let me
sir,
make a prediction.
yes, sir.
Jyoti,
Yes.
let me make a prediction. Jyoti Prakash Datta, after 34 years, 35 years, will be on being interviewed and he will remember all the good stuff and reinterpret all your present day experiences exactly the way I'm doing today. Everything's happening around you. You look back and realize it was all the same.
Indeed, sir. Indeed. It feels like that. Yes,
Okay, let's see. It'll unfold over time. Okay.
indeed. Yes, sir. Sir, as you also mentioned about internships, and you also said that you give teachings to your interns in a different way, and you give them lessons, some important lessons. I can say those are practical lessons. So nowadays we can see many organizations are coming up, and they are also giving internships. So what should be the approach to train our interns? What you do in your chambers?
See, firstly, mine is not a very big office. Mine is a small person centric office. One, say, two persons, me and my partner, it's centered on these two, and there are many other people. There are young lawyers and paralegals and everyone. But so, therefore, I don't think, and I personally don't favor very large groups of interns, because what it actually happens is that I've seen people, very senior lawyers with like 20 interns flow, like a barat behind him. Now, really, how much can he teach? I don't blame the poor fellow. I mean, so many kids following, eagerly with their name tags and with their black ties, like you're wearing, all of them following earnestly, like little chicks behind a mother hen. It doesn't work like that. So, internship, one has to seek out internship where you can interact with the person. What is in it for me? Really, it's the same thing as any knowledge that is imparted, any experience that is shared will enhance that knowledge. So, for me, I seriously enjoy having interns around. I spend enough time with them. I take aside some time out of my routine and I say, look, children, let's talk about something now. So we have conversations, I listen. But that can be done only with a certain limited number. You can't afford to have large numbers. So, again, if you want a certificate of internship, honestly, I'm willing to give you like 20, 30 every season. Doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is not to get that certificate. The point is to actually go interact, live the life of that man or woman, and actually imbibe something, take something back from there, give him or her something also. If you're learning something, you're teaching something also as an intern. So I guess that's all I can really say about what an intern should be looking for. That's the idea. Idea is not, you know, that see how many interns I have. It's not useful for anyone then.
Indeed, sir. The quantity doesn't matter, but the quality does. And you have already very rightfully also pointed out that we have to keep a limited number of interns so that we can impart the necessary knowledge in them. And you also said about we have to live the life of that particular person under whom we are interning. Uh, I didn't have the chance to intern under you, but still we are trying to live your life through this interview conversation. So,
Okay, okay, sounds good.
indeed, sir. And sir, as we know, you have represented many clients before many forums, including the district courts, high courts, and supreme court at all level. So you must have drafted many petitions, many applications, all that. So what should be your pointers and guidelines for drafting to all the younger generations?
Okay, okay. See, obviously, I'll share with you whatever makes sense to me. See, a lawyer who drafts something to be presented into court is actually doing two things. And one of these we miss sometimes in our teaching. He is the interface between a suffering individual. See, let's first understand, someone who has no suffering, someone who's a very happy man will never come to court anyway. Let's get it. Now, take it that there is a man who has a problem, or a woman who has a problem, who's come to court, and he wants to invoke the legal system to get assistance to solve his problem. To put it very fundamentally, that's it. Everyone has a problem who comes to the legal system. Now, what is a lawyer doing? The lawyer is two things in this case. One, he is the mouthpiece of that suffering individual to the judiciary. He acts as a mouthpiece of that litigant. Secondly, he's also a quality control mechanism who he acts as a filter, because an average litigant who may not understand the law, when he comes, he is full of emotion. He is full of all kinds of things to be said. Some of them may be relevant, some of them may not be relevant. Hence, the framers of the CPC, they say in just open order 6 rule 2, say your plaint must contain the facts and facts only, and material facts. So a lawyer who's drafting, and I assume I'm speaking to law students, so a lawyer who is drafting has a dual role. He has to be the mouthpiece to get the facts across, the relevant facts, material facts across to the court, but he has to do this charity to the court not to allow all kinds of trash to come in. Because if you let people to speak whatever is in their mind, they'll speak all kinds of jargon, any kind of thing, which is not relevant for the case. So please remember, when we are drafting, we have these two hats. We have these two hats which we are donning. One, we are the spokesperson, I'm repeating, the spokesperson of the litigant, but we are also the quality control mechanism for the judiciary, so that their lordships of the judiciary are not subjected to any kind of statement, any kind of trash, any kind of irrelevant material, and burden them further. So this is a perspective we need to be very clear about as law students, that we owe a duty to two, not just one. We owe a duty to my client, but I owe a duty to the court also, where I'm a practitioner. I have to ensure that what they get is worthy of reading. So, see, Jyoti, we can say a lot about drafting. A lot of wise people, much more experienced and smarter than me, have written huge epitomes. They've written books about drafting, and it's all there for everyone to read. But in an interview like this, I can share these thoughts, really. And when you've got these things clear in your head as a context, you tend to do the right thing. You tend towards the right thing. You never reach perfection in drafting. Never in your whole life will you ever achieve it, but you are walking in that direction. That is what is important.
Indeed, sir. That was a great piece of advice. We have to be very practical while drafting. We have to see how we can assist the honorable court, because that is why we draft. Indeed, sir. And sir, another thing that I can also see behind you, there are several reporters. Like it is like every senior lawyer, they store all these reporters, SEC reporters. Nowadays, we can see we have technologies. We have several forum like SEC Online, Manupatra. I probably think it was not available during when you started your law practice. So, how you get all the tracks of all the judgments which were delivered during those days?
See, getting reading, say let's, you asked about a judgment. Now whether you read it in these books, these leather bound books that you see in the background, or you read it on a screen, I must admit, I don't read anything in a book these days. I don't open they are taken out, dusted, and put back because they are there. And out of sheer habit, I've inherited them. But honestly, in last many years, I have not opened a book except maybe a bare act for an enactment. My style of functioning has changed. I read all my judgments on a screen in a PDF format. I download them there. I do my highlighting on the judgment. Now that, but the essential principle of reading a judgment is the same, whether you're reading on a screen or reading on a book or paper or a printout or a photocopy from somewhere. The idea remains the same. Let's put it this way. Again, I'm talking of nuts and bolts, But since we are talking to law students and not to senior lawyers, we are talking. Let's look at it this way. When you start reading a long judgment, you make these 4 compartments in this skull of yours. Imaginary. They're not there. They're imaginary compartments. First, you take the facts, read them carefully without any distraction, and put them in compartment number 1. And then you read the discussion, put them in compartment number 2. Then you read the discussion from the other side, put them in compartment number 3. And finally, what did the judge say? What was the decision and the reasoning in number 4? Now, that is a memory aid. If I were to teach any students, I would say this is just another way. There are many other ways. Imagine these boxes and do the sorting of that information in those imaginary boxes. You will not forget easily. But if you are all jumbled up, you're reading, desperately trying to get something. Arey, who said what? Whose argument was it? What did the judge give a finding on? Was he citing someone from the petitioner's side or the respondent's side? It's all confused sometimes in our minds. So when you read as a student, and when we all read, we are all students, we simply do a mental sorting out and say, I'm going to read this. This goes into this box and this goes into that box. And then you will see your recall will be easier. Now, of course, I do another thing. I use PDF files on a computer screen or a tablet, and I color, say, facts of the petitioner in one color and facts of the respondent in another color. That also is another memory aid, so that when you are citing a judgment, you don't always have the luxury of picking up the judgment and sharing a copy with the court and saying, Lordship, please go to para 34 or something like that. You don't always. You can do that in final hearing sometime, but you don't always have that. So in a briefer, shorter matter, you can recall without even opening the judgment. You can recall and cite. That if I were to advise students today, I would say this. I would say read judgments, use memory aids, get the gist of it, and then cite it. It's like in every subject, doctors use memory aids. Chartered accountants use memory aids. Why can't we do the same thing? Right? These are technologies, personal technologies. I hope I answered your question.
Indeed,
I hope I didn't get lost.
No, sir. And we are also expected to know all these things because lawyers are also expected to have a great memory, and that is a great piece of advice that we have.
Not just a memory. It's like appreciation of those facts, appreciation of the principles of law. That's what I'm talking about.
Indeed, sir. We have to understand why those judgments were given and why those principles were applied. And after that, we have to store all those findings that was delivered by the court. That is a great piece of advice, and I think that will be helpful to all the viewers that those are viewing us today. And after that, sir, I have something different to ask you. Let's say you get a case which is morally opposed to you, which is against your personal beliefs or moral beliefs. So, what would be your approach to that particular case?
Okay, let me ask you a counter question. I am not asking you to give me an answer today. You give me an answer to yourself later on. So, Jyoti Prakash Datta, can you hear me? I seem to have. Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
So, Jyoti, assume you are a doctor in an emergency of a hospital, and an injured man is brought in and he's bleeding, and if you do not give him first aid and treatment, he will die after some time. Will you find out about his character or whether he's a good man or a bad man? Or will you, as a doctor, do the treatment first? I suspect your answer will be you will do the treatment first. Will you find out whether what he does as a profession, whether he's a good character or he's a bad character? In all probability, he's possibly a bad character. But as a doctor, it's your duty to treat him. This is my view, my approach to the law, within the four corners of the law, and without going out of that domain, without breaking the law myself, and without being deceitful and without misleading the court. If I can find a solution for the worst man in the world, a legal solution, it's my duty to do it. And contrary to what a lot of people say these days, firstly, I am no one to judge. Who on earth, unless it's a judge himself? Okay, we give, as a constitutional democracy, we give power to certain individuals and we say we will bow down to your decision. Fine, that has to be. But as a lawyer, I'm not a judge, and I stop judging. Somebody comes, yes, if I'm breaking the law myself, then I'm making a mistake. I will not do it. But if somebody comes to me and he says, look, I'm in trouble, I'm being charged with an offense, a serious offense, can you find a way out legally? And it's my duty to do so. And I will do it. It's more important that the prosecution does its own job properly. So we, as defense lawyer, for example, can act as a counterbalance and a quality control check on the prosecution also. Don't forget, even as an effective defense counsel, you're doing a good job. You're ensuring that the police officer or the prosecutor is also duty bound to make his best effort. I think you got my answer.
Indeed,
I
sir.
would not moralize and I would not judge any litigant. I will do my best for all.
That is probably one of the best answers I have ever received. And
Have you asked this question? Okay.
indeed, sir.
I don't know. But that's my
Indeed, sir.
own, that's my truth. There can't be
Indeed, sir.
one absolute truth, but that's my truth.
Indeed, sir. And we are no one to judge. That is a very great point that I want to highlight, that we are not here to judge anyone, and it is not our job. So we have to assist them because they are here only to get our assistance, and that is a great point, sir. So apart from that, you have been in the profession for almost 4 decades now. So you must have acquired some traits. I can say those traits are very much useful while arguing before the honorable courts. So, what, according to you, are the greatest traits of a lawyer? We have heard the stories of many great lawyers, that they are storytellers, they are humorous, and they have witty minds. What, according to you, are the most important traits of a lawyer?
You just said something, right, Jyoti? You said storytelling. You know, again, it's a matter of personal belief. I'm a follower of Advaita Vedanta. For me, the whole world is a story. You tell me one thing on the absolute test that is not a story. Relative to something else, every narrative is a story. But some of these stories are very dear to us, and we do our best to uphold them. For example, India as a nation is a very precious story. We wrote this story many years back. Maybe it was written in the time of Chandragupta Maurya, who said Bharat Varsha. First time he used this word, Bharat Varsha. It's a story we are working on from 1947, 1950 onwards. But having said that, everything really is a story. Now, if a lawyer is the interface between the litigant and the court, he first needs to tell his client's story. The skill of reciting a narrative. See, whether some people don't like the word story because it means something fictional. I won't venture into that, but I would say the ability to first understand a narrative and the ability to convey the narrative is a very great skill which has to be cultivated on a day to day basis. Every day of my life, may I pray to Goddess Saraswati, may I be developing that ability to take my narrative stronger, to be more expressive, to be able to take the suffering of the people to those in positions of power and who can alleviate that suffering. Now, that, according to me, and the second, very important but not second in priority, is a quality called compassion. If a lawyer can feel the pain of his client, then he can express the pain of his client. If a lawyer has become deadened and insensitive, he cannot understand what his client is going through, then really there will be something deficient in his expression. If I can cry and laugh, I don't have to necessarily be emotional. I mean, if I can feel that pain of somebody sitting there in front of me, then I can convey that pain. Lawyers have to be living beings, they have to be alive and sensitive and understand everyone from the poorest to the richest. They're all suffering, they're all crying, let me tell you. The richest man in India is also suffering. Believe me, there's a guarantee. There's a shitbag guarantee for everyone. They're all suffering. So, one of the, if you ask me, it'll require a very long answer, but the ability to have compassion for everyone across the board gives you a very deep understanding, and then that improves your narrative to the court. You may still succeed, may not succeed. They will, because don't forget, for everyone who's sharpening his narrative, there's another opposite counsel who's sharpening his narrative, right? There's another compassionate man who's also studying the law, who's also digesting the judgments, looking at the precedents and bringing his narrative to the court. So you may, just because you do this, you don't always win. But the fact remains that you did your best. That's the quality. So, very difficult question to answer in a concise manner. Storytelling and compassion.
Uh, in a very concise way, you have given a great lesson, sir. You told us that we have to be empathetic rather than to be sympathetic, because sympathy is not the thing that we should have as lawyers. We have to be empathetic and we have to leave the pain that clients bring to us.
See,
That
sympathy
is
is
indeed.
sympathy is like pity. I don't want to be having pity on anyone, but I should be able to step out of my skin and get into his skin and say, okay, I live in this wonderful house, I have a wonderful car to drive in, but what is this man or this woman going through? Really, that's the quality has to be nurtured. Of course, everyone can study the law. It's important to study the law. It's important to read a lot. It's important to put in hard work. That's fine. But it's what is important is to be able to relate with the human aspect. Unless you get that, you're nowhere.
Indeed, sir. That is what differentiates us from other persons, and that is a great piece of advice. And sir, as you also said that we have to convey our um, experiences, our learnings to our judges in a brief way, because they are there to our they are present there to hear our story, to our case. But what is your view on the adage that we have to understand the judge? It is said that a simple lawyer or a normal lawyer understands only law, but a great lawyer knows the judge. What is your view on that?
Very difficult question. I'll tell you. Yes. And this kind of statement has been made in a snide manner also, and I'm not saying it like that. Yes, it does help to know the tendencies of a given judge, which is with all respects to all the judges. See, there are ultimately judges are human beings. They may have they are trained to keep aside their personal views about something, but being humans, they may have a certain prejudice which may occasionally get triggered. So you need to understand the personality, and that the only way to do that is to be there again and again, and to see and to read their precedents. One of the things which I have done in the past is, if I'm going for a particularly difficult matter, I've read that judge's judgments either on the same subject or even diverse subjects, to understand what he or she really believes. He or she, of course, they will apply the law. See, they are also creatures of the law. They are also going to apply the law, and they they are trained to keep their own personal stuff out. But having said that, once in a while, it's good to know the view of a judge. See, there have been cases where the same High Court has given conflicting judgments on something. Now, isn't it useful to know what this particular judge A is believes and what the judge B believes, till a larger bench will decide on that matter? To that extent, it's important to know your judge. I'm not talking about it's. Don't even ask me about knowing them on the cocktail circuit. That's not what I'm talking about, and that's not even necessary, because ultimately, when he's sitting on that chair, somewhere, he or she is going to decide on the basis of the law. Let's not let's not be cynical about it. There are people who keep saying these things, and that's doing disservice to our profession and disservice to the judiciary. If we say those things too much, knowing the law, knowing the judge, I understand. But then, yes, I've qualified my answer. What I really believe, you know, I've had wonderful friends who became judges, and I stopped meeting them because I don't feel the need. And they continue to be great judges. They disagree in some cases, they agree in some cases. So what? That's how it works.
Indeed, sir. We have to know their philosophy, but we are not required to get them get them to know personally, because that is not important to know. We have to know their philosophy, their beliefs, and their line of decisions, but not we should not know them personally. That is a great point, sir. And apart from that, sir, as we are going to end this session soon, so I want to ask you another question. That you also said you have studied law in Delhi University, and that is a great institution in itself. And you have also told us about your fascination about law and how you entered this profession, and before that, how you studied law. So, sir, if you will be given a chance to go back to your law college, do you have anything to do? Do you regret that you couldn't do during your stint as a law student that you want to do now if you will be given a chance?
Yes, yes. I would spend less time in the tea shop and more time in the library if I were to go back today. And I would say that about my beginning years in the profession also. I spent too much time sitting in the canteen of the High Court, chatting up on useless subjects and having useless discussions when I could be working. I have that. I mean, it's not a serious regret, but now that you ask me this question, if I were to start life again, I would study more, I would work deeper, I would go into deeper into research about all my cases. I sometimes I get frightened thinking that I appeared in court without deep research in some cases and got a battering. And sometimes I nevertheless succeeded because the judge had done his research. See, I'm fortunate. Sometimes when I did not prepare properly, I have no hesitation in saying so. When I did not prepare properly, I was fortunate that the judge was knowledgeable, and the judge brought up those things and gave me benefit and gave me relief. I am grateful to all those worthies. But if I were to go back and had the facility of restarting my life, I would study better, I would go deeper research, and having said that, you can always restart your life this moment again. So if Jyoti Prakash Datta has a regret, he can forget about going back in time but start again today. No harm. We live another day. We are all alive, fortunately. So we can learn those lessons and apply them today.
Absolutely, sir. It is never too late. So
Yes,
it is indeed, sir.
absolutely.
Indeed, sir. As we know, sir, you always travel a lot. We have seen your social media accounts. You travel a lot. Wherever you approach in honorable court, you also go the side by areas. You meet people. So apart from that, what else you do in your leisure time?
See, there is something which I have always enjoyed doing is living history. It's my passion. Read about places, read about characters. One thing I used to do as a younger man, I used to go to different. See, I happen to live in Delhi, and Delhi is a fascinating area. So I used to go to places in and around Delhi or wherever I traveled and then read up about them. And then those places assumed a new life, right? So it's like I see some ramshackle building which everyone is driving past, and I go and read up about it, and it comes alive, and there's a story behind it. As I said, every stone has a story, every pillar has a story, and not one, multiple stories, right? For example, in Delhi High Court, I don't know if you've ever been there. Inside the compound, we have a mosque, which is still a living mosque, where people say prayers on Fridays and other days, which was made some 800 years back. Can you believe it? An 800-year-old mosque, fully preserved as much as it can be, inside the High Court of Delhi. Now, people drive past it for 20 years and never look inside. And then one day, a very seasoned lawyer asked me, "What is this?" And I said, "See, aren't you aware? You've been in this high court for decades now." So they went in and were fascinated. So, my passion is history. My passion is reading about the past and its linkage with the present. I think that's
That's
otherwise, of course, so many things to do.
That's what fascinates us about you, sir. Your love for history, and that is the one reason that compelled us. I can say that compelled us to invite you in this show because that is what,
That's very
uh,
nice of you.
indeed,
I
sir. That
enjoy
is what.
talking to you. I seriously enjoy talking to you.
Indeed, sir. It was a great pleasure because we learned a lot. Because you talked about history. It is not very often that we get chance to uh, talk with someone from our fraternity who talks about history and who holds so much interest in history and historical monuments. That's what very much fascinating about you, sir.
No, it's not
And
just
sir,
monuments. Jyoti, can I add something? It's about every judgment that you read has a huge history behind it. Every precedent that you cite has a huge history behind it. Just go deeper into it and you'll see so much there.
indeed, sir, indeed. We can see nowadays we see Keswanand Bharati case, but if we go deeper into that particular case, we can find Sajjan Singh and many other cases.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Absolutely.
indeed, so that is a great piece of advice, and I am very much sure that it will help many people in the future days to explore the history behind everything, not only judgments, not only monuments, but
Yes,
behind
yes.
everything. And before parting with this talk, so sir, I would request you to give some advices to our viewers who are aspiring to get into the litigation and who don't have any backing in this profession, and basically who are the first generation lawyers.
So, can I say something about that? Because being a first generation lawyer is a wonderful thing, right? You're better off. See, I personally feel that when you are a second or a third generation lawyer, and the larger number of generations, the more problems you have. Because people, I remember I was a second generation, I am a second generation lawyer, but a lot of people who knew my father, his clients, other people, they expected me to know the same as my father did. So they said, I've even heard snide remarks saying, look, this man doesn't know as much as his father does. See, remember one thing. Ultimately, no client can be fooled beyond a point. You have to deliver the quality. Whether your father and grandfather or 5 generations were lawyers or none of them were. Everyone has to work. Everyone has to deliver quality of service. We are a service-based profession. We are not even selling goods, right? Now, please do not even go into this thought or even nurture a thought that just because I'm a first generation lawyer, I have a disadvantage. That's not the case. There are enough number of cases where first generation lawyers have done far better than second generation lawyers. I would say that with full responsibility. And sometimes a second generation or third generation gets lulled into a sense of protection or a sense of well-being which is not genuine, because the world out there is difficult for everyone. I'm not scaring people away. I'm encouraging people. I'm saying, forget about this idea of first or second generation or third generation. It doesn't mean anything. You have to work, you have to be good, and you have to impart quality. Don't even think about it.
Absolutely, sir. Everyone is living his own struggles. First generation lawyers would be having some struggle in getting a brief, but the second generation or the generation lawyer would have his own struggle about maintaining the quality, what is expected of him. So that is a great advice, sir. It was a great honor, sir. We talked for almost 1.5 hours, and it was very much enlightening. We learned a lot. And before parting with this show, I would request our co-founder Devashish Kumar Panda to advance a proper vote of thanks, because it would not be sufficient to give a vote of thanks, but still, for a formality, we will definitely give one. Devashish, please.
Thank you, Jyoti Prakash, for asking very, very relevant questions to our honorable guest of today's evening. And I must say that he has answered it in a very well manner. So, moving to the formal vote of thanks, I, on behalf of my team, Lex Cognoscenti, would like to give profound gratitude to our distinguished speaker for today's evening, Mandeep Singh Vinaik sir, for telling us about his childhood, about how he came to this law profession, how were his initial how was his initial day, how were his initial days at the bar, and then a lot of story regarding a number of monuments, high courts, and people he has met during all these years, and the pointers regarding drafting, researching, and being a good lawyer, and the advices that you have just given in this interview. We are really grateful, sir, for having you on board with us for this particular interview, and I am really, really sure that the viewers will get inspired by knowing your story, by knowing the pointers that you have said, and it will encourage n number of law students, young law professionals, and will boost them in many ways. So we are really, really grateful, humbled, and obliged to have you today with us, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for sparing almost 1.5 hours of your time from your busy schedule. So we are really grateful, sir, for having
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. I
Thank you,
really
sir.
enjoyed this interaction.
Wishing you a prosperous and healthy life, sir.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.